So hello everyone, and welcome to today's session on the ACFID Code of Conduct review. It's really wonderful to have all of you joining us today. So please just make sure that you're on mute unless you want to ask a question a bit later on, but feel free to have your videos on or off as well. It's always nice to see who's joining us if possible. And it's nice, I can see already that we've got some people joining us from ACNC and the Code of Conduct Committee, as well as our members. So welcome to everyone who's here. So today I want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm joining you from today. I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past and present. I acknowledge that First Nations sovereignty was never ceded, and that this continent was always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And we extend our respect to other Indigenous or First Nations people here today. So it's great to have a really good group here today already. And I know there are many people joining from all different parts of Australia and possibly even in the Pacific as well. So I encourage you to introduce yourself and where you're joining from in the chat. That way we can kind of get a sense of who's here today. So once again, welcome. If I haven't met you before, my name's Emily Morton. I'm the Standards and Code Lead at ACFID, and I work alongside Paul Brunton and Whitney Yip on all things related to the implementation and promotion of ACFID's code. And we've got Jocelyn Condon, the Director of Effectiveness and Engagement here at ACFID, joining us as well. So the purpose of today's session is relatively simple. We'll be sharing some information with you about the upcoming code review, how you can be involved as it progresses. Hopefully the mention of a code review has filled you with great excitement rather than any anxiety. But today is also a chance for you to ask any questions that you might have. And hopefully, if we have time, we'd really like your input as well, just to test a little bit of our initial thinking, where we're up to at the moment, and get a bit of a sense check from you about a few issues that we're thinking through. But to begin, we do have a couple of questions for you to help us know who's joining, and also to get a sense of what you'd like to get from today's session. So we're going to use something called Mentimeter, which some of you might be familiar with, but it's an online polling tool. So all you'll need to do is to get your phone, or you can open up another window in your browser on your computer, and you'll need to go to www.menti.com, which you should be able to see up on the screen. Once you do that, you'll be prompted to enter in a numerical code. And again, you can see that on the screen at the moment, hopefully. So if you type in that number, you'll see a first question come up. So we'll get everyone to have a go at that one. I can see a few people in there already. So I'll jump over so you can see who's here. Fantastic. I can see quite a few people have found it. I'll just share this for you so you can see. So we've got quite a few of you who sort of work in the compliance risk space, a bit of programming, some other. I apologise to anyone who's other that I've missed your little niche category. That's fantastic. All right. So a really good mix, it looks like, which is great. So obviously we've been speaking a bit to the ACFID compliance contacts, but we're really keen to also speak to people who work in different parts of the organisation. Obviously, the code relates to all things that your organisations do, so that's great. All right, so you should now see a second question pop up. So this one, we're just, you can give us one word, a short sentence, doesn't have to be anything too long, but if you have any specific questions that you already know that you want answered today, or just a general view of what it is you're sort of hoping to find out about. Hopefully we'll cover most of them, but keen to get a sense of what you'd like to know too. Okay, great. A little bit on why now, good question. New requirements, just keeping up to date, making sure you know what's coming up, bit of the scope, where we might be heading. How we might think about some specific issues like safeguarding. Yeah, participants' interest. If we have any planned changes already, yeah, okay. Excellent. All right, that's super helpful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So hopefully today we'll be able to answer some of those questions, and by the end of the session you'll have a bit of a better sense of the overall process. But if you do have specific questions as well, we're going to set aside some time today at the end for that, as I said before. So that's fantastic. So first of all, we'll just give a bit of an overview, I guess, about kind of how we got to this point in time and doing and thinking about a code review. So reviewing the code is a really exciting opportunity, we think, to reflect on our sector's understanding of what good practice means at the moment and how we want to operate as Australian NGOs. So I know that some of you on the call are relatively new to the code, but one of the strengths of the code is that it's a set of good practice standards that is created by the sector, by Australian NGOs for the sector. So the code is owned by you, ACFID members, and it's something that your organisation has chosen to commit to improve its development outcomes and build trust through greater accountability and transparency. So the code is deliberately aspirational, and it sets an agreed benchmark of good practice for our sector. So any changes to the code have to be approved by ACFID's members, as well as by the board and the Code of Conduct Committee. So it's up to members to implement the commitments in the code, and we really rely on you to help shape what it covers as well. So the code itself is made up of several different components, and we wanted to just quickly run through these. We won't spend a lot of time on it, but we know that some people are relatively new, and we wanted to make sure we're on the same page so we know what it is that we're actually talking about when we say we're going to review the code. So the code itself is structured around 9 high-level quality principles, which cover all aspects of an organisation's activities. So these are further described through commitments and compliance indicators, which describe the actual behaviour that ACFID members commit to. And in the last code review, there was a real desire from members to have a strong verification system to help organisations know what they need to have in place to actually demonstrate their commitment. And these are outlined in the verifiers or the evidence. There's also good practice indicators, which aren't required for compliance, but they're sort of that next step that organisations can take in a continual process of improvement. And there's also definitions and, of course, a lot of guidance and resources and tools that make up the good practice toolkit that sits underneath the code and the quality assurance framework. So there are quite a few components to the code and the quality assurance framework, and changes to the code can be made on all different levels in these parts. So the code is not static. It has been continually evolving since it was first developed in 1997, primarily to make sure it's keeping up with good practice and remains useful and relevant to members. So we had the question before, why now? And this is just part of a good due process in terms of periodically reviewing to make sure that the code remains relevant and useful. So some of you will remember the last review of the code in 2015-16, which was quite a significant undertaking and resulted in a complete restructure of the code and quality assurance framework. And since then, it's continued to evolve. And we've seen new requirements added to strengthen the code around the prevention of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. We also know that changes to the code can have implications on compliance for members. And as part of this review, It might be that members decide that no changes to the code are necessary at this point in time, and that would be okay. Or it might be decided that updating the good practice indicators or the guidance associated with the code might be more appropriate than changing, say, the commitments. So these are all discussions that we will have as part of the review. And for this, we need your input. So I'm going to pass things over to Paul now, and he's going to just talk us through the objectives of the upcoming review, who's going to be involved, expected timeframes, and so on. So thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Look, it's possible I might be joined by a co-presenter at some point through this presentation, although all is quiet at the moment. He might be off having a snooze somewhere. But if you hear any growling or barking, it probably won't be me. It'll probably be Alfie there. So apologies in advance if anything does happen. As Em says, it's been 6 years since the last review. Now, that doesn't seem so long, but we all know that those years have been jam-packed with major events, with things that we've been warned about, or that were all hypotheticals. They've actually happened or are happening now. So as a consequence, we've seen changes to our operating environments. For example, there's now greater urgency around climate change, greater emphasis on localisation, diversity and inclusion, and changes to how we operate, partly brought about by COVID-19. So the review is to ensure that the code keeps pace with these and other developments and continues to reflect current good practice. It then follows that a code that reflects contemporary issues and practice will be an asset to yourselves, to our stakeholders, and to our communities. And as Emily mentioned, the code hasn't stood still since the last review. We've strengthened and clarified a few areas, and we've also mapped the code against the ACNC governance standards and the external conduct standards, and also against DFAT's ANCP accreditation criteria, with a view of identifying areas of alignment and difference. So that the code review gives us some opportunity to build on that work as well. So what are the objectives of the code review? Well, as I mentioned, we want the code to remain relevant to you. We also want the code to reflect your development and business practices. And we want the code to address contemporary issues, and we aim to address any gaps or where the code is no longer strong enough. And we want to do this in a way so that compliance with the code is also manageable for you. So in this regard, we'll be looking for parts of the code that are now out of date, where requirements overlap, that are duplicated, and that can be rationalised. We also want to identify and address any areas of the code that are not working as intended, or that unnecessarily inhibit your operations. Where the code is unclear, we aim to use the review to clarify requirements, which should help make your compliance easier as well. And another way of ensuring the code compliance is manageable is to look for and take advantages of opportunity to align the code with other standards and regulation where we can. The code review also gives us some opportunity to update the code guidance and resources such as the code's good practice toolkit. And when we talk about, I think someone mentioned scope and the Mentimeter poll that we ran. So there's some things that we're aiming not to do in this review. So the review is really intended to be, I suppose, a lighter touch review than the last review in 2015-16. And we're not undertaking a restructure or major rewrite of the code. We're also not aiming to change the current compliance approach. That is, we rely on your self-regulation, backed up by a code self-assessment every 3 years, and an exceptions report on the other years, and also the annual provision of annual reports and financial statements. And we're not planning to do anything to the emergency response compliance process or the Code of Conduct complaints handling process. So you'll see some of the things that I was talking about just reflected here in the design principles that we're doing the code review under. We'll only make changes to the code and the associated quality assurance framework where they're needed. The impact on what you need to do to comply will be identified and considered in any proposed changes to the code. Our focus will be on the code's content. As I mentioned before, we won't be touching the overall architecture and structure of the code, nor the compliance requirements. The objectives and design principles, they're all been included in the code review's terms of reference, which has been endorsed by the Code of Conduct Committee and the ACFID board. And to keep us honest, the review will be guided by a reference group. The reference group comprises of 3 ACFID board members, a couple of Code of Conduct Committee members, a representative from the Development Practice Committee, an ACNC rep, a DFAT rep, and a couple of friends for the sector. Now, the friends of the sector are someone from the Pacific Islands Association of NGOs, and we hope they'll be able to provide us a grassroots perspective of how the code is playing out. And we've also obtained a rep from the University of Technology, Sydney, who's has some expertise in standard setting. So in addition to the code review reference group, we'll be engaging with a number of other stakeholders to determine potential changes to the code and to then develop and decide on the changes. And of course, we'll be engaging with you, the members, at all stages of the review. And Emily will talk about how you can be involved shortly. So up front, we'll need you, the members, to tell us what the issues are from your perspective. And at the end of the process, you'll get to decide on what changes are actually made. Of course, the ACFID and code governance bodies are key stakeholders. DFAT is an important stakeholder as well, due to the close relationship between the code and the ANCP accreditation criteria. Moreover, DFAT are reviewing the ANCP criteria over the same period that we're reviewing the code. So we hope that will, well, we anticipate that will provide some opportunity for some alignment of requirements. We'll also be engaging with our communities of practice, particularly on their particular specialty areas. And we're also keen to get a grassroots perspective from your partners. So it'd be fantastic if you could reach out to your partners as the review progresses. And they're welcome to give us feedback either through yourselves, or they can quite welcome to participate in any of our consultation sessions directly, or yeah, provide us direct feedback straight back to the code team. Again, as I mentioned before, Emily will cover this in a bit more detail shortly. The code review will run over 4 phases. So we're just coming to the end of the preparation phase, and we're about to move into the consultation phase. So really the next thing you'll see from us is a brief discussion paper, which we expect to come out in early August. That'll pose some focusing questions, and the idea there is to help you stimulate thinking, or help stimulate your thinking, and also flag some potential areas to look at from information that we've collected since the last code review. But really the purpose of the discussion paper is really to just promote and get discussion going. It's not intended to lock anything in. It's not intended to be prescriptive. It's just a starting point. After that, we then plan to run some in-person and virtual consultation sessions in September. Emily will talk a bit more about those in a minute, and she'll also talk about other ways that you can have a say in the code review. Towards the end of the year, we hope to be in a position then to be able to work back the feedback that we've received into some proposed changes. And then that will lead to a further round of consultation in the first half of 2023. Then after that, it will be time to sort of hone those down into final decisions and put those through the respective governance bodies all leading up to getting member ratification of any changes to the code at the 2023 ACFID Annual General Meeting, which would be around about October 2023. After that, then there'll be some further work on implementation, which will probably mainly be around updating our guidance and also updating our compliance systems. So here it all is in a timeline. As you can see, most of our planning at the moment is in the consultation phase. We'll do a bit more in-depth planning for the couple of phases after that, once we get an idea of what's coming out of the consultation. So this timeline will develop over time, and you can find the timeline and the codes, terms of reference, and other documents and background up on the ACFID website. We've got a code review page, and I think we'll have a link to that available a bit later on. And of course, we'll update those pages as things progress. Yeah, so that's it from me, and I haven't been interrupted at all by Alfie, so that is great. And I'll now bring Emily back in, and she can tell you about how you can get involved in the code review. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Paul. We always love an Alfie interruption, so it's a bit sad actually. So there's going to be many opportunities for you and your organisations to participate and provide input over the whole review period. But at the moment, we're just focusing on the next few months for the initial consultations. So as Paul mentioned, we're currently in the process of drafting a short discussion paper, and that will be shared with you in mid-August. So it'll outline the key questions about some of the broad objectives in the review and a couple of the issues that we think are likely to come up from members just based on conversations already. So you'll be able to provide your feedback to this discussion paper through an online survey. You can also do that via email. And where relevant, as Paul said, we'd really encourage you to reach out to your partners, and they could, some parts of it might be more relevant to them than others. So we'll touch base once that comes out as well about that. In early September, we're going to be holding some face-to-face workshops, hopefully, in Melbourne and Sydney, as well as an online option. So these are going to be facilitated by an external consultant, and will be an opportunity to have some sort of deeper discussions guided by the paper and what we're hearing already. But the final dates are still being confirmed. But as Paul said, we'll put them up on the website and be emailing people as well. In terms of communities of practice, I know some of you are, you have particular interests. I know the comment around safeguarding and, how we might look at particular topic areas where you have expertise. So we're going to mainly be using the COPs for a lot of these conversations, although also welcoming other input as well. But the COPs will be the space to discuss issues in more detail, depending on sort of what comes out of the initial consultation workshops and feedback from the discussion paper. And finally, there will be a session at the ACFID conference in October for those of you who are attending, so keep an eye out for this. And please reach out if there are other ways that you would like to be involved, or if you have thoughts that you'd like to share with us. We always welcome those. So we're coming up to the end of the briefing part of this session. We wanted to make sure we had plenty of opportunity for your questions. So if you do have any, you can please feel free to start adding them into the chat now. But as Paul has already said, if you haven't seen it already, there is a dedicated page on ACFID's website with some information about the review. If you miss any of our email correspondence, or you just want to double check, there's frequently asked questions up there. So please go and take a look. By default, anyone who's an ACFID compliance contact for their organisation will be receiving email updates about the review and consultations. But we are really keen to have input from a wide range of staff and volunteers. And so if there's anyone in your organisation or yourself who would like to receive sort of more regular updates about the review and the progress, please just send us an email at code@acfid.asn.au and we'll add you to the mailing list for this project. So that reaches the end of the sort of briefing and overview of the process. We did want to make sure that you can ask any questions that you might have. And there might be, I know there was a bit of mention before in the Mentimeter about some of the issues that are already arising. So happy to discuss those, but I'm just going to stop sharing so we don't have to all look at Moira. She's Lachlan. All right. Okay. Did anyone have any questions that they have about the review process itself, or anything else that you'd like to know a little bit more about? I'll give you a minute to just pop some things in the chat.
One from the chat, Emily. Hi everybody, I'm Whitney. I think Carla has asked, we need a very intentional consultation stream with partners and communities. I guess that's not so much of a question, but I will make it into a question, and it'll be like, how can we do that?
So understand what is their ask and expectations of us. Yeah. Okay, so about engagement with partners. Yeah, this is something we've just started thinking about, sort of the most effective way to do this. And I think some of it will come out of the issues that are brought up through the discussion paper as well, as to where the code is sort of, or the code review is focusing, and the best way that we can get input from partners as well. We obviously know that there's a huge diversity as well of the types of partners that members work with. So we might, well, it's something that we need to think about a little bit more based on what sort of comes out of those first discussion, because there are certainly some aspects of it that are more relevant to them than they might be for the members themselves. So I think also on particular key issues that might arise, they might have sort of implications for partners that are different as well. So yeah, at the moment, because the discussion paper and the first kind of issues that are being talked about are quite broad still, it might be that there are a couple of questions in there that are more relevant. But thanks, Carla. We will keep thinking about that and check back in with you too. I think I can see another one here. So just a question, is there a time frame for receiving comments? We have done the code self-assessment. Will the review consider? Maybe, so could you just, if you could just clarify that one a little bit. So are you just asking, will the review be considering the code self-assessment process, or if you can jump on and...
Hi, this is Matt from Food Returns. Sorry, my question is that is there any exact time frame for us to receive the comments? Since, for example, we have submit our self-code assessment like 7 months, and then we haven't received any comment yet from ACFID yet. Is that can we considering to think of?
I think that's a little bit of a separate process, but I know Paul's been looking at, I know you're with Good Return, looking at yours recently. So that's probably a bit separate to this review process. But yeah, this is more the review of the whole code itself, but we'll definitely be coming back to you shortly about the code self-assessment. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, did we have any other questions?
I've got another question in my message box. So will all of the recommendations that come out of this this review be implemented?
Great question. So obviously at this point in time, we're trying to go wide with getting our feedback around the range of issues that members are thinking through at the moment, what's working, what's not working with the current code. There is a whole decision-making process that goes with actually making changes to the code. So what will happen is towards the end of this year, we'll, after the consultations, we'll come up with a set of recommended changes or not changes to the code about how to proceed on different issues. We will then feed those back in to members for their input and start drafting any potential changes to the code itself, to the wording. So it might be that, you know, obviously, if there's a lot of feedback on a particular issue from a wide range of members, that would be something we'd take up. We will consider all the feedback, absolutely, and sharing it back with the members. There's often robust discussions, I would say, about certain topics and trying to gather opinions from all different organisations. But ultimately, you'll have a chance to review any final proposed changes to the code. And again, they go through an approval process through the Code of Conduct Committee and the board, and then come to council as well for a vote. So I hope that answers that person's question. Ellen?
Taking myself off mute. I just want to say that the work that ACFID's already done to look at the relationships between the ANCP criteria and the Code of Conduct requirements has been really, I think, invaluable for a lot of agencies. And I just wondered how much more widely the review might look at consistency. I know you've mentioned consistency with other international standards, but I'm thinking of things like CHS and how that might play out and how those kinds of consistencies or alignments might work.
Yeah, the CHS is an interesting one. It's the core humanitarian standard, if you're not sure. And we have looked at that in the past. It's not something we've sort of done a formal mapping that's sort of out there, but we'd definitely be looking at other standards like that. I think Ellen is kind of thinking through whether they're aligned. I guess for us, it's, yeah, it comes back to, is it relevant and useful for our members within what they're doing? But there's always benefits in being consistent as much as possible in terms of the purpose of each of those standards. So it is something we'll be looking at as part of the review. And obviously, as you said, like we have some of that mapping documentation already available to us, but it's that next step of saying, well, okay, now what? Like, do we want to change the code because it's kind of aligned here, kind of not? So those are the kind of slightly trickier next step questions that we want to think through. And as Paul said, you know, with a DFAT accreditation review, we're hoping that there might be opportunity to, yeah, make the most of that if we can. Yeah, we're trying. But yeah, it's yeah, that consistency, I think, even on things like definitions and so on, just to make it as clear as possible for organisations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, burning issues at the moment? If not, that's okay, and we've got a couple of questions for you too.
I've got another question on my chat. It's a member has asked how much will the review be looking into reducing redundancies and I guess repetitions?
Sure. Yeah, that will be one of the issues that we're looking at. So particularly for those of you who, dive into the real depths of the code and look at the wording and are trying to kind of do your reporting as well. We're going to rely on you to help us kind of find those areas that are less clear or that you think are not, where there might be overlap. So those questions will be in the discussion paper. So if you do have specific areas that you think that's just asking me the same thing again, or something like that, please flag it for us. We'll obviously be looking through it ourselves, but yeah, that will be something we consider. Fantastic. All right, well, the chat's going to stay open there. So if you have a question that comes up that you haven't thought about yet, or if you think of a question later on this week and want to get in touch, please do. I can see. Kayleen's asked, is the code considering broadening ways of working? The code compliance is naturally community development focused, but not all members work with partners on community development programming. That's a good question, Kelly. We're definitely interested in understanding how different members are applying the code and what they understand in terms of the language and expectations of the code around working with partners. Definitely not all of our members work with partners at the moment, and there are some aspects of it that require them then to take that next step to think about who they're funding and how they operate. So it's certainly, yeah, a common challenge. So I imagine it will come up in the discussions in terms of how different organisations are just applying the code and what it means to them. So I don't have any kind of thoughts at the moment about which way it might go, but I think it will come up as under that question around, is this relevant for all of our organisations? Is it useful for them in the way that they're operating? Yeah. And consult with CDC, yeah, for sure, Ellen, yeah. Obviously, there's been a lot happening for those of you involved in ANCP recently, and sort of understanding how that impacts on, or what the impacts might be as we get to the end of that review and start looking ahead to accreditation and funding and so on. So, yeah. Okay, we might switch things up briefly then. We have obviously been doing quite a bit of thinking about this here at ACFID. We have the privilege of sort of hearing all different perspectives from members, but because we have you all in one place already, we thought we'd pick your brains just initially on some of the things that you've been thinking about, or where you're feeling things are going at the moment. So let me I'm going to get you to go to Mentimeter again, but it's going to be a different code. So you should be able to see the new code up there on the screen now. And hopefully if I press present, it should appear for you. So the first question is a bit of a ranking question. So there's a few statements in there for you to have a little think about. Obviously, this is just your personal feelings. We're not expecting to be an organisational response or anything. It's all anonymous, but we are kind of keen to get a sense of what people are thinking at the moment. So you can move the marker along the scale to show if you agree or disagree with each of those statements. I'll leave the code up there just for another minute and then show you the responses. All right, I think it's in the chat too now, I can see, thanks, Shweta. So I'll share. Not that this would influence your, responses or anything, but you can see what others are thinking as well. Okay, so it looks like most people are feeling like it's kind of relatively okay. And obviously these are things we'll dive into in more detail about where it might not reflect current practice or what, you know, in what ways. Compliance being manageable, a bit less so, but still most of you are agreeing or strongly agree. Maybe a little bit less appetite to change the code. And the resources and guidance are relatively useful. So that's good to know. Where as part of this review, sort of in tandem, we are going to go through all of our resources on the Good Practice Toolkit, do a bit of refinement, and hopefully, yeah, make sure that we're really targeting tools and things that are going to be useful for you specifically for the code. So that's just kind of part of this whole process for us. All right, looks like most people have done that one. So there's one more question. So this one's a word cloud. So you can put in one word, a short phrase. You can put in as many as you like, as many times as you want. But some of you were keen to kind of think about what are the issues that are going to come up. So it'd be, yeah, keen to hear what you think are the issues or developments that have emerged in our sector more recently that maybe we should be thinking about as part of the code as well. Great, so I can see we've got nearly half the people putting things in. Mesmerising, strange way. All right, so feel free to keep adding things. This is helpful. It is kind of confirming that some of the key issues that we have been thinking about are probably ones that you are talking about as well, particularly localization, climate change, decolonization, sort of racial justice issues. But there's some really fantastic ideas in there as well around other things that maybe haven't come across our radar so much. Safeguarding is obviously a big issue that we have been thinking about the last few years. Even things around like remote working and how we manage our sort of people and culture and operate as organisations, changing how we operate as well as NGOs. Fantastic. All right, well, I will share these all with you as well, just so you have a sense of what others are saying. It keeps moving on me. But that's really fantastic. And I wonder if I'm happy for anyone to share any more thoughts as well about particular issues that they'd like to discuss as part of the review. Certainly for us at the moment, we're in drafting up the discussion paper. We have decided to test, I guess, in a bit more detail, a couple of those issues. First one being locally led development or localization. It's certainly something that we see, you know, impacting all areas of our organisation's work. The other one is climate change. At the moment, it's sort of tangentially referred to in the code. So some potential discussions about if and how we might want to incorporate that in, and similar discussions around kind of racial justice and decolonisation. So we would encourage you with that discussion paper, we'll kind of dive into those issues in more detail at the moment. That's not to say that no other issues are going to come up or be discussed at all. It's simply that based on kind of feedback we've received already and conversations we know are happening, that's where we thought we might as well get the ball rolling a bit faster on some of those issues. But that's, yeah, we will definitely touch base on a couple of those other things that have come up as well. So if you do have, you know, colleagues who are interested in particular areas, please do, yeah, encourage them to provide some input into the discussion paper as well. We'd welcome feedback on just, you know, one section if that's all that's most relevant for them. So that's fine. Let me have a look. That another question: will the review consider the compliance requirement for the size of the organisation? Will smaller orgs have less requirements and bigger ones will require more? So that's a good question. So one of the values and principles behind the code is that it's proportional to your organisation. That's always been the way, and that's how it will continue. We don't have any plans to change that at the moment. So what we would expect in terms of the systems and processes, policies from a much smaller organisation will be really different to what we look for or what we would expect a larger organisation to be implementing. It's also a really good question when we start thinking about potential changes to the code. So that is something we would always keep in mind as well. Is it relevant for all members? Are all members going to be able to meet those standards? And writing it in a way that recognises the kind of diversity of members as well. I can see Paul's taking himself off mute, so do you want to add something?
No, not really, no. Code, I was just going to say, yeah, write the code in a way so there's some flexibility around how you meet the requirements. I think that's how it works at the moment. So we've still got to meet all the compliance verifiers and that, but they do give you a bit of room to move. So small organisations might just need a statement on something to say that commits them to doing something, whereas a bigger organisation might need a full-blown policy. Yeah, so it's an interesting question, whether or not, you know, a small organisation needs to meet all the requirements in the code. I suppose at the moment they have to. That's the design at the moment. You've got to comply with every compliance indicator. Yes, I suspect that could remain the same, but I suppose people have got ideas, even if they might not get picked up as part of the code review because we weren't looking at the compliance aspects of things, but they certainly could feed into some other stuff outside of the review as well, a bit further down the track.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that question.
Yep.
All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions or any discussion points that you did want to raise at this point in time, we'll wrap up. But if you, yeah, as we said before, please keep in touch. If you're unsure of when things are happening or have any questions, please just reach out to us. We'll make sure this is being recorded, so it'll be up on the website. You can check back in if you've forgotten any of the salient details. Yeah, we're really looking forward to working with all of you on this project, and yeah, we'll be in touch really soon.